Now let's go on to part 2 and see what traditional Buddhist literature has to say about right livelihood. You may be surprised to hear that it doesn't say very much. Right livelihood is there as item number 5 of the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. But the Buddha himself doesn't say a huge amount about it. The reason is quite easy to understand. The Buddha was living in a traditional society where social change happened very slowly. Most people did the same jobs that their grandparents had done and expected that their grandchildren would do the same job as well. The jobs actually available did not change over hundreds of years. Most people had very little choice about what jobs they did, and to try and change their job might be dangerous or even illegal, as under the later Indian caste system. In a little sutta called the Vajjayana Sutta, the Buddha tells us 5 types of jobs to avoid. Here they are: trade in weapons, trade in people, slave trading, trade in meat, butchery, trade in alcohol, like running a pub, and trade in poison. I better explain the last one. Apparently, if you wanted to get rid of somebody awkward, you could buy some poison for the purpose if you just happened to know the right people. However, the Buddha thought that was a bad idea, and so do I. The Buddha also talked about the characteristics of wrong ways of earning a living. And they were things that involved scheming, persuading, hurting, belittling, or pursuing gain with gain, which I think means excessive profiteering. Now, it really might be an interesting exercise to think of some modern day equivalents for that little list. I'll just repeat them again: scheming, persuading, hurting, belittling, pursuing gain with gain. In another sutta, it's called the Digajanu Sutta, the Buddha talks about the benefits of an honest livelihood. He tells us to become skillful at our jobs and not to be lazy. He specifically mentions as occupations he seems to approve of farming, trading, rearing cattle, and doing service to the king. He tells us to spend time with good friends and keep our spending within our income. He also tells us to enjoy using our income with charity and generosity. In one of the numerical discourses that are called the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha goes a little bit further and actually tells us how to enjoy what we earn through honest toil. He describes 4 enjoyments, which he calls 4 appropriate happinesses. The first appropriate happiness is the happiness of ownership. The sutta says, quote, "A son of good family possesses wealth that has been obtained through his own diligent labor, acquired through the strength of his own arms and the sweat of his own brow, rightly acquired, rightly gained. He experiences happiness thinking, I possess this wealth that has been obtained by my own diligent labor, acquired through the strength of my own arms and the sweat of my own brow, rightly acquired, rightly gained. This is the happiness of ownership. Now the sutta continues in a characteristically long-winded and repetitive way to the second happiness, which is the happiness of enjoyment. Quote, "Through this wealth that has been obtained through my own diligent labor, acquired through the strength of my own arms and the strength of my own brow, rightly acquired, rightly gained, I have derived benefit and performed good works." It's very significant to me that the Buddha spoke about performing good works as an integral part of the enjoyment of what you earn. Generosity for the Buddha was not painful, but enjoyable. Not an optional extra, but an integral part of the benefits of hard work. The third appropriate happiness is freedom from debt. I won't read through the whole passage again. You get the picture as to how it works. But the Buddha says the fourth appropriate happiness is the most important. The fourth appropriate happiness is the happiness of blamelessness. He experiences pleasure and happiness thinking, I am possessed of blameless bodily actions, blameless speech, and blameless thoughts. When he realizes the happiness of being free from debt, he's in a position to appreciate the happiness of owning possessions. As he uses his possessions, he experiences the happiness of enjoyment. Clearly saying this, the wise man, comparing the first three kinds of happiness with the last, says that they are not worth the 16th part of the happiness that arises from blameless behavior. He tells us to enjoy what we've earned and to enjoy freedom from debt. He reminds us that generosity and good works are an integral part of the enjoyment of the fruits of our labor. Giving to others is not a burden and not an optional extra. It's an integral part of the enjoyment. But above all else, the Buddha tells us to do work which leaves our consciences clear. The Buddha seems quite relaxed about people being prosperous, as long as one's prosperity is honestly earned and used for the benefit of all. Buddhism does not see any virtue in poverty. The great 20th century Indian Buddhist, Dr. Ambedkar, put it like this, quote, "Religion must not sanctify or ennoble poverty. Renunciation of riches by those who have it may be a blessed state, but poverty can never be. To declare poverty to be a blessed state is to pervert religion, to perpetuate vice and crime, to consent to make earth a living hell. The poor are not blessed." So Buddhism does not so much ask as what you've got, but instead asks how you got it and what you do with it. In the famous Sigalovada Sutra, the Buddha talks about the ideal relationship between employer and employee. Here, the Buddha describes employers and employees as having an equal amount of duties and responsibilities to one another. The duties of an employer are 5 in number. 1, to give staff work according to their ability. 2, to supply them with food and wages. 3, to tend them in sickness. 4, to share with them any delicacies, and 5, to grant them leave at times. Holidays are a right. Good thing too. The employees, in their turn, have 5 corresponding duties. 1, they rise before their employer. 2, they go to sleep after him. People work long hours in the past. I'm not quite sure what modern people would think about rising before their employer and going to sleep after him, but be that as it may. Number 3, employees take only what is given. Employees deal with an employer who is cruel or exploitative. How should they respond to instructions that may put themselves or others in danger? When might it be permissible to refuse to obey an order? And how should an employer deal with staff who are dishonest, uncooperative, or just plain lazy? When is it okay to sack somebody? We're not really told, and in the traditional, very hierarchical society that the Buddha lived in, I imagine those discussions just didn't really take place. In the Sigalovada Sutra, the Buddha does entertain us with a list of excuses for idleness. I'll just rattle through them quickly because they are quite good fun. Quote, he does no work, saying, 1, that it is extremely cold, 2, that it is extremely hot, 3, that it is too late in the evening, 4, that it is too early in the morning, 5, that he is extremely hungry, 6, that he is too full. Living in this way, many duties undone, new wealth he does not get, and wealth he has acquired dwindles away. So we can sum up this whole second section by saying that the Buddha was clearly in favor of honest work and the enjoyment of the material rewards from it. It's slightly curious because we've got no evidence that the Buddha ever did a day's work himself, but that's by the by. He seems to have favored a prudent, careful approach to the money earned by honest work, but combined this with a strong encouragement of generosity. He may very well have approved of the likes of Bill Gates and George Soros, rich people with large charitable foundations.